Alright, so here's the video where I'm going to be talking about a project that I'm particularly proud of and going through the different things I did during it. I will comment that this is on the exact same night as the video I submitted before this one. I got news that I'm going to have to work on something sooner than expected, and I'm going to have to get that done. It's not for class or anything, but I got bad news about my family and a few other things, so I'm trying to get this done now before something else comes up. So, basically, I'm going to be talking about my podcast, or the podcast I made, and what I did for it, and basically how it all went down. So, when I heard we had a podcast assignment and we could have, or we could have multiple people in it, and it was supposed to be a bit of a longer podcast, I was excited because I've had to do a podcast before and it was by myself, and I just literally sat at the computer that was sitting behind me with this microphone and spoke about audio demo, or not audio demos, voice acting demos. And I didn't really like it too much. I like podcasts. I just didn't like having to sit there by myself and not be able to bounce anything off of or talk to people and stuff like that. So when I found out we could do a podcast and we could do it with people or with groups and everything, I was excited. I got two of my close friends, Andrew and Leah, to help me out with it. We did it over the Star Wars sequels. I butchered that word. Ooh, butchering words right now. Star Wars sequels. And I told them about it at the beginning of the semester, and they were both down for it. And we planned it out and everything, or I sent them all the information. I basically was the one planning it out, just seeing when their schedules were open. When I say we planned it out, so we all went and we did the podcast. So where we did the podcast was in the film building at UNG, and we sat in the audio recording room for about 2.5 hours and recorded it. The podcast is like 2 hours long, but it took us a little bit to get everything ready and set up because I brought my own equipment for it because I was expecting to use it, but none of the hookups that were there worked with mine. So when I say hookups, I mean stands and everything, and I couldn't find a place to put my stands in there, so I had to just go with what was in there, which was two boom mics, which I placed one between me and Andrew, who was on my left, and then one between me and Leah, who was on my right. And I stylized it using those two mics to sound like you could hear where we were in the room, because I like that element for the actual podcast. So we sat down and we recorded the podcast, but before we had even started the podcast or anything, I had, for the last, I think week and a half leading up to us doing the podcast, I had sat down and watched all the movies. And it took me a week and a half because I hate those movies and I cannot sit down and watch a movie I dislike for long periods of time. And most of that time was spent on the last movie, which I think is the longest and is the one I hate the most. I ended up typing out a whole entire 5-page bullet point paper with bullet points going 2 ways down this entire sheet about all of the things I liked and disliked. Most of them were dislikes, but again, I don't like those films, so that's why there was a lot of dislikes. We then sat down and we didn't really, I told him what the plan was, but I said we're going to make it very informal, because I wanted our personalities to be in there and not be kind of stiff, I guess is a good word for it. So we sat down and we just kind of started going. It was 2 hours long again. That there's a cut down version. That's what I submitted. So I think that one's 24 minutes and 24 seconds. So there's a lot that I had to cut out. But basically, we sat down for 2 hours, recorded that. I then came home and did some editing because I wanted to add a video part of it. So there is the little screen that comes along with it, the little icon down in the middle, and then little character standing there, and then I think it's got a name, and it's like, I think it's The Stories We Love to Hate. I think that's what I titled it. And honestly, that was the most painful thing to do. Not to make the video or anything, because that was pretty easy. What was hard was the little thing around the little icon at the bottom, the little audio wheel. It messed up multiple times when I tried to render it in Adobe After Effects. And I had to render it over like 3 days because for some reason it decided it was going to be hard on my computer, even though it's meant to do stuff like that, and it's done stuff that's a lot more difficult than that, and made it way easier. I don't know what was going on with my computer those days. Now whenever I try to do it, it's working fine. But I uploaded it, got it all ready, started rendering it, rendered a whole entire night, sat up for like 3 hours waiting for it to render, finally finished rendering it. I looked at it, and it was completely screwed up, so I had to go back and redo the whole thing. That was a whole process. Then I finally rendered it out, and it was great. Submitted that, made the edited version, which I took that, put it into Adobe Audition. Basically went through it, found every single part I wanted to include, added it in, kind of mixed them together a little bit, because you can tell sort of when it switches over, just because you can kind of hear the room tone change, but it's not very noticeable because we sat in the same exact room the whole time. Made it so it kind of transitions smoothly. Did that, cut it down, only included what I thought were either the best parts or the parts I would like to have heard, because I wanted each one to get a section for a pro and a section for a con, or more for the con, because again, I had more cons about those films than I did pros. So yeah, we sat there, we did all that, 2 hours, well, 2.5 hours in the recording booth, recording station. Altogether, I think that was honestly the most time I spent on a project, because one, I was very passionate about that. It's all audio, so I'm going all out on that. So I spent days trying to figure out where we were going to do it, and then I finally got the okay on the audio room, and it was so nice in there. So that, like, my process for that started at the beginning of the semester, which was me getting everything ready, but when it came time to actually do it, I spent a week getting all of my points together, watching through the film so they were fresh in my mind. And then we went in, recorded it, 2.5 hours, like I said, and then I came home, edited all of it, and I think I did that within a week of doing it. I can't remember exactly. It took a little bit, not like the most amount of time I spent was either going through the entire podcast, cutting up and finding where I wanted to include in the shortened version, or the actual rendering of that video, which I really like how the video turned out. I like the little audio wheel. That was the whole point of me making it into a video. So yeah, that's my entire process of how I went about doing my podcast. It is what I am probably the most proud of when it comes to what we've actually created in class. I think there's a lot of good things I created in this class, but that one in particular is my favorite, because pretty much everything I put time and effort into was the audio and actually making a good podcast, and I'm really proud about how it came out. So I just kind of wanted to talk about my entire process when it came to that. So yeah,